evening, and thank you all for joining us this evening, and thank you to those of you that are joining us on Zoom. This is Designing Inclusive Communities, Vienna's approach and looking at San Diego's opportunities. My name is Anu Natarajan, and I am the Managing Director for the Global Policy Leadership Academy, and I manage the global housing practice, including the Vienna and social housing program. A little bit about GPLA for those of you that don't know us. I'm assuming everybody in this room knows GPLA, but our mission statement is really about supporting established and emerging leaders in forging solutions to intractable problems and global challenges through transformative educational opportunities, partnership, facilitation, and research. So GPLA is structured to do 4 programs right now. One is the Vienna Field Study, which is a 5-day immersive program where we take a delegation from California and beyond to Vienna to study their approach to planning, approach to housing, and housing for all. We will be providing more details about the next delegation, so we'll let you know more about that. In addition, we've been conducting many camps, the Housing Policy Leadership Academies and boot camps, and this is for folks that really want to understand about housing. This is for anybody in the field, the housing ecosystem, that wants to understand the intersectionality of housing, how it intersects with the way it's regulated, how it's built, and understanding the basics, but also really to become pro-housing in terms of supporting the right kind of housing solutions. We're in the process of launching a program we call Elevating Housing Leadership Series, and this is for electeds, for local electeds. And again, providing them with a space and opportunity to understand the intersectionality of housing issues more at a regional level, because housing is a regional issue. And lastly, we do workforce development education, and also a community of practice which is being launched, which is really to continue education for folks that have been part of one of our programs, and to provide ongoing support, opportunities for peer learning, and just sharing of best practices. So the agenda for today, welcome. I'm going to provide a brief overview of Vienna's social housing system, and then we have an amazing panel here. All 5 of them have been to Vienna and have come back inspired and want to share some of those ideas with you, reflections from Vienna. And then we'll open it up for questions from the audience for the panelists, and then close. And after the close, then we will have a reception here so we can continue the conversation. A quick minute to thank our sponsors, Alliance Healthcare Foundation, Funders Together to End Homelessness, Previs Foundation, and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. We couldn't do this work without their support. So almost the first thing I want to start with is, what is social housing? We've heard the term social housing being bandied about, especially in the last year or so. Everybody's talking about social housing, and everybody means different things when they talk about social housing. So for us, what social housing means is that these are intentionally planned and developed mixed income communities. The public sector plays a huge role. They're either government owned or regulated, and they are permanently affordable. Housing security is through permanently rent-restricted homes tailored to local needs, and social housing is something that prioritizes high-quality, affordable housing for all, including the middle class. So some of the elements that we just talked about, when you talk about social housing, typically social housing considers housing a human right. It's a universal foundation, not just a market commodity. Again, as I mentioned before, it's mixed income communities, so it is not just for the poor, it includes the middle class, preventing segregation. And there's a huge emphasis on tenants' rights, strong protections and participation by the tenants in terms of the housing that they want to live in. A prominent public sector leadership role, both in planning these communities, financing them, and long-term stewardship. And again, I mean, this is very, very important. Unlike the US where the housing is affordable for 30 years or 55 years, these homes are permanently affordable. They're decommodified and shielded from speculation. And what you will see about most of these social housing projects are that they're really well designed, and they're designed for social inclusion. They're designed to foster dignity and belonging. So a quick overview of the Vienna social housing model. I know a lot of people question the need to go to Vienna. I mean, here we are in the US. Why do we need to go to a European country where the political system, the cultural values are so completely different from our housing system here? Because Vienna is an ideal location for an experiential field study because it has an international reputation of being one of the most livable cities. And it has a global benchmark for equitable urban development and the focus on planning for all. They have a 100-year history of municipally driven social housing policies and values where 60% of their residents live in subsidized or social housing or public housing. And we'll walk through some of those details with you. If you take a look at Vienna's housing journey, it's over 100 years old. But through that entire time, there has been this firm commitment to housing for all. And the core values have been consistent while there have been some flexibility in addressing some of the changes or addressing issues such as the refugee influx over the last few years, the focus on sustainability and upgrading energy conditions for some of the existing homes. But just across the journey, there's been a consistent adherence to the values for social housing, whatever the political movement has been, both in Vienna and in Austria. So some key features or attributes to Vienna's approach. Again, affordable housing is not just for the low income. It's not simply dealing with homelessness. It's really looking at providing housing options for all. 82% of Viennese qualify to live in social housing. 53% of their entire housing stock is social housing. And today, over 60% of Viennese live in social housing. Some key features in Vienna's approach. Again, I've gone through this, but I really just want to reiterate it. Housing is a public good and a social right. You will hear from our panelists about the approach to people-centered planning to provide inclusive and sustainable communities and have them thrive. Has a really prominent government and public sector role in providing housing options for all through land banking and providing a steady stream of funding for these housing units. What is remarkable is that they have an integrated housing system with a single point of entry for anybody that wants to be part of that system. And they also prioritize infrastructure investment, and that is not something that they think of as being done by developers at a project level. So quickly, looking at Vienna's housing system, the housing ecosystem, you see this little puzzle here, and these are the different departments within the city of Vienna. Vino is responsible for all of the municipal housing, building them, managing and operating them. MA50 is the planning department that really looks at zoning and land use issues and providing for planning input. Vino is the agency that really puts together, they act like a quasi-developer and make sure that they acquire enough land dedicated to build social housing. One service lead provides for the tenant services and all of the other services that are needed to keep these systems alive. And then in the light gray, so the dark blue are the public agencies, the light gray are the quasi-public agencies, so they are nonprofit but work with the public sector. And then what is also interesting is all of the different advocacy groups, like the GBV Association, which is a limited profit housing association. They have a chamber of commerce. In addition to that, they have a really robust chamber of labor. And the University of Vienna has a really strong research department that doesn't do housing policy research in a silo, but they work with the city to provide what the city needs. And some of the tools that they use, they have a really strong social safety network, housing policy research that's done consistently. They have a department that does urban innovation, both for the way they look at planning, but also innovation in construction. Sean Spear will talk a little bit more about that, but just looking at how they should move forward over the next few years. They really are very, very intent on social mixing and social cohesion. Environmental stability is one of the 4 pillars that they look at. But the 3 things that I want to focus on today is land banking, a sustained source of funding, and what they call the limited profit housing model. So land banking, again, as we said, Montgomery is the agency that really looks to acquire new property. And a lot of times when they have rail yards that are not in service anymore or an old airfield, they acquire that land for housing, for social housing. So they've acquired almost 3.1 million square meters, enough land for them to sustain over the next 15 to 20 years of all of the housing that they need, not just today, but into the future. They're also really good about looking at some of the influx of population, especially over the last few years of the refugees coming in, and making sure that there's enough housing and options for them too. Zoning is absolutely an instrument for land acquisition, so as they convert on the industrial agricultural land or old commercial land, they look to make it a subsidized housing zoning category, which is actually the social housing zoning, which requires any property that's over 5,000 square meters to include 2/3 of the housing on it as subsidized housing or social housing. They still do include market rate housing, but that is about 1/3 that's allowed on those sites. So the Limited Profit Housing Association, they have over 185 of these limited profit housing models. It is somewhat akin to our nonprofit affordable housing, mission-driven affordable housing developers, but not quite. They have laws in Austria that restrict the profits that can be made, and any profit that they make over a certain percentage, say 3.5%, goes back into providing equity to additional housing. So their profits are capped. They're also a partner in the public-private partnership model and bring their own equity into the projects as well. And since the 1980s, the LPHAs have become the developers that build most of the housing, and they've been building between 5,000 and 7,000 units per year. We'll talk about the smart units and what they are, but really, they've looked at creating this new pool of developers who understand how they're going to be participating, what their partnership is, and what their profits are capped at. And again, there's a huge demand of these developers to be part of these projects, both in Vienna and outside of Vienna. The third component is funding. I mean, one of the things that you all are aware is the siloed, unsustained funding that we have, and the huge competitions for the LIHTC funding and the tax credits that developers struggle through. Vienna's funding comes from a 1% income tax that's been in place for the last 100 years. And that brings them between 200 and 250 million euros every single year. In addition to that, the equity in the properties, both from the municipal sector and the limited profit housing model, brings them another 200 million euros. So they have, again, may not seem like a large amount of money, but a consistent stream of 450 million euros every single year. And the interesting thing in Vienna, unlike here in the US, is 85% of those funds goes to funding new projects with what they call object funding. And only 15% of that funding goes towards subsidizing rents and making sure that people who slip through the cracks have the ability to come up back into the system. And these funds are low interest loans. They're used for land acquisition, and a lot of the money is also being used for renovation and energy efficiency upgrades now. So, just a thought exercise. I know this is not going anywhere, but if we think about a 1% income tax for housing in California for people who make upwards of $250,000 a year. And in Vienna, the 0.5% comes from the employee and 0.5% comes from the employer. So if we did that here, it's 6.5 billion plus 6.5 billion per year that can be used for housing. Just saying. So we talked about the markets, right? So Vienna does have a robust social housing market, but it also pays attention to market rate housing. They treat their developers as partners, are very clear about what they want to see, and so 47% of the housing stock is still market rate housing. But because you have a fairly extensive subsidized housing stock, 24% being municipal housing, and 28% being limited profit housing models, that has a dampening effect on the rents that can be charged for market rate housing. So you have a sense of affordability and options for the entire population of Vienna, whether it's through the municipal housing and limited profit housing, the two of them together are called social housing, or if it's through the market rate housing options. Again, in terms of housing prototypes, a lot of times when we have some of the delegates come from smaller towns, smaller cities, they want to make sure that some of the ideas that we're talking about is not simply an urban shift into some of the small towns. So it's really not. I think they have a variety of housing prototypes. The municipal housing includes 2-story walk-ups to 12-story buildings. Similarly with the Limited Profit Housing Association, they don't have super tall buildings, they're really pedestrian and human scale. The smart apartments are really small units, well-designed small units for empty nesters and for anyone that wants to get into that system. So anybody that's 18 and up can apply to be part of the system and be allocated one of those smart apartments. There's also a huge focus on owner cooperatives, CLTs, co-housing, and other ownership models now. The one thing that really was interesting is this idea of gentle density. So a lot of their older buildings are 5-story buildings, and they've taken it upon themselves to add an additional 2 stories of housing. And again, unlike how we sometimes treat historic buildings, they do not go with fake historicism. They really go with more innovative contemporary architecture, and you can see a project here, and it's just really interesting and intriguing to see them add these units into an existing footprint. There's also a lot of emphasis on temporary emergency housing, again, to deal with the influx of refugees that they have. So 2 years ago, we had a fairly large delegation from Los Angeles that went on the trip, and when they came back, they wanted to put together a report, including some of the lessons learned. Plan and build at scale on public lands, to really start thinking about public lands and how we can use them. Restore government role in infrastructure development. For those of you who've been in this planning world for a long time, 2012 and redevelopment, which provided the monies and the tools to do infrastructure development was taken away. And so every city, every project, every developer is struggling with how to provide for infrastructure without adding to the cost of construction. Ensuring a permanent funding source and a simpler capital stack. When you talk to developers, you will hear that they need 8 to 10 different sources of funding to put together over different and varied timelines to make a project happen. Could we do this with a simpler stack? use the new regional housing finance agencies for more innovative models. Greg will talk about the regional housing finance agency and what that means and what San Diego is doing. Plan and build for the middle class in mixed income communities. Promote alternative housing models. And I think the last one is really important, is creating a new housing narrative, to talk about what housing means, what affordable housing means. Here we are struggling with whether we should call this social housing or not call it social housing, but really the idea of what are the values behind social housing and how do we start messaging and talking about that. Some of the opportunities that we have in front of us, we talked about the three, we will be talking about the regional housing finance agencies. The Bay Area started its first one with BAFA, or the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. La Casa in LA started a couple years ago, and they have a stream of funding now and are looking to do some really creative and innovative work. And Greg will talk to us about the San Diego Regional Housing Finance Authority, which just came together earlier this year and has big plans of doing some really innovative work. It has a very interesting story of its origins being not from the typical housers, but from educators who believe that we should be looking at housing for all. Social housing pilots, I mean, you've probably heard a lot about the Social Housing Developer Agency in Seattle. Seattle also just elected a new mayor who wants to do new and innovative things. So we will be looking at Seattle to see what they're doing. Montgomery County, Maryland, put together an innovative revolving fund where they funded some interesting projects, took some market rate projects that had stalled and made them into more affordable projects. I mean, it's really not a true definition of social housing, but really an example of innovation in funding and financing. And here in Long Beach, you're going to probably hear a lot about some of the social housing pilot projects that they are embarking on. Statewide, the housing agency is going through a reorg right now, and I think it's a great opportunity for each of you to be involved and engaged in what comes out of that. SB 555, which was a bill from 2 years ago, is a California social housing study. It's a 2-year study to take a look at what models may be appropriate for the state of California. How do we build at scale? How do we make sure that some of the ideas of social housing, including tenant protection, tenant engagement and involvement, innovative financing, and the inclusion of middle class is looked at. So the Turner Center for Housing Innovation is taking a look at that study. We've been involved with them in looking at pro formas, and that study will be out by the fall of next year. So lots of ideas peppered around the country, and so we, again, will keep an eye on what's happening. But I think for us here today, it's really taking a look at some of these ideas, some of the inspiration from the Vienna trip, and making sure that those ideas get percolated as San Diego starts thinking about its approach to innovative housing and funding and financing. So with that, we're going to shift to our panel discussion. We've got 5 amazing panelists: Supervisor Montgomery Steppe, Sean Spear, Vino Pajanor, Elyse Lowe, and Greg Smith. And as they come up to the front here, I'm going to quickly read their bios. Supervisor Montgomery Steppe leads District 4 as the first Black woman on the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, and she's been focused on advancing equity and community well-being. She drives policy and behavioral health, housing solutions, and public safety reform. Established the City of San Diego's Office of Race and Equity during her tenure on the City Council, and she champions restorative, community-first approaches to governance and public service. Thank you for joining us, Supervisor. Sean Spear is the President and CEO of Community Housing Works. He leads Community Housing Works on expanding and preserving affordable housing options across California and Texas. He drives development of innovative, resident-centered community services that strengthen long-term housing stability. He brings decades of public and private sector experience in housing development to advance equitable communities. Thank you for joining us, Sean. Vino, Pajanor.
What do you call it?
No, I want to get it right. Pajanor, CEO of Catholic Charities of San Diego. He leads as their CEO in advancing programs that address homelessness, food insecurity, and support for vulnerable communities. He oversees services across San Diego and Imperial counties with a focus on dignity, stability, and long-term impact. He leverages a background in law, nonprofit leadership, and social innovation to drive cross-sector collaboration. Thank you, Vienna. Elyse Lowe is the director of the City of San Diego's Development Services Department. And as part of that department, she oversees over 700 staff and a $150 million budget. She drives housing, land use, and sustainable development initiatives that shape citywide growth. And she leads policy and operational reforms across public and nonprofit sectors to advance efficient, customer-focused development. Thank you for joining us, Elyse. And last but not least, we have Chancellor Greg Smith. He's the Chancellor of the San Diego Community College District. He drives regional collaboration by helping create the San Diego Regional Housing Finance Authority with, or in partnership with the San Diego Unified School District, and he will talk to us about that in more detail. He champions development of affordable housing that strengthens students, families, and the broader community. So we have over an hour of in conversation with the 5 panelists here. As I said, each of them have been to Vienna. And so our goal is to really explore how those housing principles from Vienna can inspire San Diego's next era of inclusive, sustainable housing for all and community building. And with that, I'm going to have each one of you just take a minute to tell us about your organization's work with housing.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I think mine will be pretty quick, but I think it's important from the County of San Diego perspective just to kind of break down where we have land use jurisdiction. So we have 18 cities in the county, and each one of those carries their own authority to make their land use decisions within those city boundaries. We make the majority of our land use decisions in the unincorporated area. But we have used land that we own within the cities to help cities develop. And so, you know, we play kind of a large role and then sometimes a smaller role. But overall, there are 2 things that the 5 board of supervisors really do agree on, and that is how to address our crisis of folks being sheltered and without a home and without behavioral health services. So those are, you know, things we agree on. So that's pretty much a very short summary of how the county is involved in housing.
So again, as mentioned, Sean Spear, President CEO of Community Housing Works. We are a nonprofit affordable housing developer, owner, and provider of services to our residents. We've been in existence for 37 years, since 1988, and have over 54 communities, over 5,000 units of housing. This is permanent housing in the form of for families, seniors, some special needs, including for the formerly homeless. I think what sets us apart is a fairly robust affordable housing industry in the state. But for us, we emphasize sort of in essence of truly trying to create a community that supports the residents that live there. So it's not enough to say, hey, congratulations, you in affordable housing, won the lottery. It's typically a lottery. But from there, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go in terms of your future? And what can we do to help you reach those goals? So our services come alongside them in terms of providing for education, primarily for K-12, including with a scholarship program. We also then have health and wellness programs, primarily for preventive care for seniors. And then lastly, financial sustainability, which is around sort of household budgeting and planning for their futures, whether they're looking to try and put a kid through college eventually or to eventually buy a home themselves. So a lot of that has been sort of in our DNA from the beginning. We were doing supportive housing before it was a term. Our very first community was 6 units up in Escondido, in which we were taking formerly homeless single mothers that were living in their cars and providing a home for them alongside being able to provide some services to help them better their lives. And that's pretty much been what we, is the spirit of what we do. We like to look at ourselves as being aggressively prudent and trying to look at innovation and opportunities to do housing in new and more impactful ways.
Thanks, Sean. Hi, everyone. I'm Elyse, Lowe, Development Services, City of San Diego. Probably asking yourself, why is this bureaucratic regulator sitting on this panel? And I am here because I like to wear a lot of different hats. I did have a role in advocacy for sustainability and housing advocacy and transportation for many years in nonprofits. And when I came back to my job at the city, I said, how are we going to make this city run better so that we can build more housing for the people? And I went to the perfect job to do that. Luckily enough, I had worked with mayoral administrations to advise on housing policy. I've been doing that for a long time now. And it's been my goal within the organization of the City of San Diego to, one, make the culture of where I work into a place where the people who go to work there really, really value their jobs and understand how important their work is, so that they can see through all of the complexities of what we have to implement when we are working on housing permits to try to find ways to help us make it better. So I work to make the mayor and council happy when they put forth policies and have them adopted. It's also our job to strategize with the city planning department to implement community plans, specific plans, and the projects within those and their compliance, all while making sure that we make the state of California happy because of the legislature's position on housing and all of their regulations that they have put forth to make sure that housing becomes more streamlined. So play a number of different roles. I love working with our community groups, our industry groups. I am always willing to take feedback from not only the developers on the nonprofit side, all of the industry groups. We really try to foster a culture of collaboration so that we can reduce obstacles to getting housing on the ground.
Good afternoon, everyone. Greg Smith, Chancellor, San Diego Community College District. I'll follow Elyse's model and say, if you're wondering what a city bureaucrat is doing here, you must really be curious to know why somebody from the community college would be sitting on this panel, and perhaps more importantly, what on earth does he have to say that I should be listening to right now? So I'll briefly share 2 really important moments in me being here in front of you today. One was back in 2021. The state had a significant surplus in revenue that year. And one of the things they did with it was to put about $750 million to fund community college districts to start planning for and building affordable student housing. That same year, the most comprehensive survey of community college students in the country was completed that had ever been done to that moment, called the Real Cost Survey. And I learned in that in our district, with our 4 colleges serving the city of San Diego and about 90,000 students a year, about 20,000 of them are unhoused right now. Another 30,000 are housing insecure. A problem at that scale is not going to be solved by others. And that's the conclusion I came to. Because at that moment I was skeptical about, should community colleges be building housing? Ideally, students are only with us for 2 years or less in our workforce certificate programs. And so this is a very short-term solution, and housing is incredibly expensive, complicated, regulated. Like, we have enough problems running educational programs. What are we going to do in this space? But when I saw that scale of need, I thought we have a capacity to take action, and so we need to lead on this and take action. The second moment was in the late spring 2024. Lori Koski, who many of you know, is I think here somewhere, said, our Vice Chancellor of Development came and said, hey, we should really go on this trip to Vienna. Is Lori trying to get me fired? Like, there's gonna be a headline. Community college chancellor takes summer vacation in Vienna to look at housing, right? What are we gonna learn there? We're talking about student housing. This doesn't make sense for us. And she said, no, I really think that we could learn a lot. I talked to some other people that have gone. And so we found a way to do it without using district money or any public funds to pay for it. But what I learned being there really opened my mind to the possibility. Getting completely outside of the social, political, financial context in which we exist and seeing a society that had embraced housing as a human right 100 years ago and had been innovating over that 100 years, new ideas that never would have occurred to me came. And then the third really important moment is in fall of 2024, legislation was signed that would allow any two local government agencies with elected boards to come together and form a housing finance authority. And so while the Bay Area and LA had to go through very complicated coalition building and multi-year legislative efforts, San Diego Unified and San Diego Community College District could, in a matter of a couple meetings, very quietly, form a housing finance authority with the capacity to go to voters and articulate a message around affordable housing that I think could be received very differently because of the names and faces that people would put when we talk about affordable housing, as families with young children, as educators, people working in education. I think that we can do something really transformative in this space because of those opportunities, which I'll talk more about later. But that's who I am and why I'm here.
Just like what Greg mentioned and others have, you may be wondering why is Catholic Charities here? Catholic Charities has been in San Diego and Elyse County for 106 years, providing homeless shelter services, providing low-income housing for seniors, some of permanent supportive housing for the formerly unhoused, food pantries for those who are food insecure, and various other services for immigrants and refugees. So, but Catholic Charities is the official social arm of the Catholic Church here in San Diego. There are different dioceses across the world. So, I can probably state it's one of the oldest corporations in the world, 2,000 plus years. So, it is a faith-based entity. Don't get me, our mission is to be a good Samaritan and do the works of welcoming the stranger, feeding the hungry, and clothing the naked, and taking care of the sick, and visiting the prisoner. But about that, one of the calling is, okay, what are we doing for the community? And for 2,000 years, we have still trying to figure this out. And as I came 7 years ago, I looked at the church, and especially in San Diego, in our region, the church has a lot of assets. It owns a lot of real estate. We have people in the pews who go to our church, and about 300,000 every weekend attend church services in our Catholic churches. So we have been thinking internally with Catholic Church and the diocese and Catholic Charities, what can we really do? What kind of a difference can we do? And we are focusing on, let's not reinvent the wheel. You've got entities like Community Housing Works and others who are doing into the low-income housing and affordable housing. Where can we come and make a change? And our focus area was in the middle income, the missing middle, 80 to 120 AMI. Because that also affects those who are coming to our pews, who are there, who are like teachers and others who just missed the eligibility requirement but can't live and work in the neighborhoods where they want to be. So we looked at that. And then this Vienna program came by, and Jennifer Lazar said, you've got to go. You've got to go see what's happening in Vienna. So I landed there on a weekend. And as a Catholic, I went to church. And was there in Mass. And then the next few days was Anu and the team and everybody walking around seeing all various projects. And it dawned on me, these are the people who are sitting with me in the pews, who are living in the social housing and mixed income housing. If they could do it, why can't we figure this out? Of course, 100 years, you saw in the history, there's Red Vienna and all of that right stuff. But we can do it differently, and that's why Catholic Charities is looking at it and saying, how can we look at the architectural models, the different building concepts that are coming? So we are working on a different way to look at this, not only to financing, the way that we can finance it, but reducing the cost of construction and see if innovative housing can come on our land. Through building this for this 80 to 120 AMI, we can maybe reduce the NIMBYism Because if you go tell in our church pews, the people in the community, you don't want your Catholic school teacher to be living here, you don't want your sacristan to be living here, they're going to say no, because they can't come back to church next day, right? So, how can we get to agree with our communities to buy into the fact, just like what has happened in Vienna, and see what we are there. So that's why I'm here representing Catholic Charities and the Catholic Church locally here.
Thank you, Vino. So when a bureaucratic regulator, a chancellor, and a faith-based leader walk into a bar, what happens? Vienna. I bring that up because when we curate these delegations, we want to make sure that there's people that are typically not at the table with each other, who are in conversation, who are in this mode of immersive learning together. So there's different perspectives that are brought up. And each of them came up with such fabulous big ideas, and that's absolutely part of what this learning journey is. So quickly, I'm going to turn to each one of you. You all went to Vienna. Again, each of us went there as a skeptic, understanding that we couldn't wholesale transfer all of those ideas to here. But there were some things that were very inspiring. And so, Sean, I'd love for you to start with what inspired you. What's that aha moment that has stayed with you since then?
Yeah, so I forgot to shout out to my class of 22.
That's right.
One of the early ones. Yep. Yeah, I think there was a fair level of skepticism coming off the plane there, so to speak. I think there was a sense that, well, it must be an entirely different ecosystem with a different approach to things, and different levers in terms of getting things done. And while some of those things were certainly true, I think what I came away with more than anything else is that, they have many of the same tools that we have here. They just use them in a very comprehensive and leveraged way. And there's a lot of cooperation amongst the entities and a lot of goodwill in the public that supports those institutions doing that kind of work. When you think about it, at the end of the day, there's still public finance involved. There are still investors in the form of the associations themselves and their projects. They are sort of paying forward the equity that came off of their previous deals and refinancing them, doing rehabilitations, and then the additional equity that they have in those, they turn it into their next projects going forward. Just lots of ways in which they were leveraging things in a very holistic sense. I think there was also a sense that with a little bit more community acceptance comes a little bit more courage from the public agencies to do things that were, some would argue, would be very challenging to do here, but I think we've chipped away, particularly at the state level, in terms of small measures to encourage housing development, and also on the city and county levels in terms of the cooperation that they provided when we're trying to get projects done. So a lot of it at the end of the day is, I think, having kind of a sense of a policy that gets developed around a common vision, like social housing, and there are different definitions of it, depending on whether they're looking at the Hamburg model versus Vienna versus Dublin. Fine, that's all things, but the concept in a very clear sense is how do you support the creation of housing and sustain it for the long term for as wide a group of people that need it as possible. And I think at the end of the day, that's a common vision that I think a vast number of people can come together on.
Thank you. It's been said a couple of times, but it was going to be part of my one-liner, so I have to say that it's the fact that the value of housing as a human right is just so fundamental to everything that they do. And if we could find a way to embrace that within our government, our policies, our finance, put our money where our mouth is, that's how we're going to be able to achieve this on a broader scale with that value. And really, for me, looking at the longevity of the programs that they have, the affordability and perpetuity versus what we have here was sort of an aha moment for me. I mean, we have, housing that's affordable housing, 10% is the requirement, and then if that, it's 55 years. Why? Why is it only 55 years? I think I understand why at the beginning, why it was like that, but maybe we should be rethinking that. And then, we have programs now where we offer bonus density for accessory dwelling units, and that level of affordability is only rent restricted for 15 years. Like we need longer periods than that, especially due to how high rents are. So I understand why we create carrots, I understand why we have incentives, and I understand why we put forth regulations, but I think it's time to look at how do we create programs that are more similar to Vienna, where people can have it in perpetuity and pass their affordable unit onto their family member. That to me was just a striking difference that we need to figure out a way in order to really make that happen. So part of that was some of my aha moments of what we could look forward to doing here in San Diego or in California.
So a lot of what Sean said is what I thought I might talk about, but since he said that far more eloquently and with more technical precision than I could have, I'll go to two. One was seeing the value system behind it, and the origin story in part is tuberculosis and the fact that it could care less about your address, whether you're nobility, royalty, the gentry, the working class, the poor. They would have to solve the problems of having people live together cramped in unsanitary conditions. And out of that came this idea that there is a basic level of safety and human dignity that need to be part of our housing law, which is totally different than the American version, which was combinations of go west and settle and populate this area. And then also this is the pinnacle of wealth transfer for your family. And so at first I thought, well, culturally this will never translate. What would it take and how many centuries to have America give up the idea of home ownership is you've reached the top kind of your socioeconomic mobility. But combined with that idea of dignity of housing, then seeing what all of the planners that were with us marveled at, like this is the thing we studied in college that we never thought anybody would do. But going into a master plan community of 5,000 plus units, where they built the transit stop, but where they broke ground on the housing, that it was done at such a scale that all of the other infrastructure investment, all the other infrastructure investment that needed to come with it, a grocery store, a hospital or a medical clinic, a post office, all the basic day-to-day things you need, there was an incentive for the companies to come there that had nothing to do with let's subsidize this in some way for you to be here. Like they created a community of mixed income at a scale that could absolutely work, connected to transit, connected to jobs. And so seeing that model totally changed my thinking about coming into a housing finance authority, what should we be planning towards? Because now I've seen what it can look like and it can actually be done. And the importance of having market rate mixed into that and what it did around the overall quality of the community they were building. Because now there's a profit incentive. If you're going to maximize the market rate units, you cannot build substandard housing for everybody else. And we know all the social benefits of having mixed income and the community and the social navigation capital that comes with living in a community of mixed income. So they got a lot of things right by trial and error in building large-scale communities that way that we can absolutely bring back and adopt into a very different social, political, and economic model.
Thank you, Greg, for mentioning this, talking about building community. And that's what I saw in Vienna. When you go to church, so from Catholic Church and Catholic Charities, I can say this, when you go to church, there's no division of I am upper class and I'm lower class and I'm going to sit in this row and that row. Those kinds of all gone. Now we said we are all equals. Similarly, in Vienna, they had people who were millionaires living next to folks who were most probably low-income wage earners. And they did not just leave it there. They just built community around this housing where people were not only mixed with housing, but also socially they were mixing in, and they were building a community. They had other services that were going on over there. They were celebrating stuff. So it was just not housing alone, because that is a big difference when we look at housing over here. And I live in my neighborhood, and I don't even know if my neighbor is alive or dead. That's how we have built our housing in. But here in Vienna, what we saw was it was not just about having different styles of housing, architecture, or financing. They were building community there. So it took them 100 years, but I think 100 plus years to get here, but we are already there in this sense, but it's just in our thought process and how we operate is completely different. Because we are looking at housing as an asset for generational wealth transfer. But on the contrary, we are not looking at housing as a quality of life. That we are going to be living there, and what is my quality is not the question. I own a house that is $1.5 million. That's what my mind is going to. But am I looking at it takes me an hour and a half to get to work? That is a mindset that has to be a transformational change that has to be foundational to us, where as a community we're just looking at, hey, do I go back home and have a glass of wine that we're all going to share later on and have community, build a system where everybody is coming around, whether you're a millionaire or just a person who is making low income or middle income, that we're all coming together and building community around us. And that's what I thought that we should bring back here to San Diego or into the United States and look at housing as just not a wealth transfer environment for generations, but more a lifestyle transfer to one generation to another.
Supervisor?
Yes, thank you. So I think I'm going to take I won't be long, but two different approaches to answer this question. And one thing that I felt as I was touring with our cohort, all of these different huge, massive, amazing developments that had so much greenery and everything that you would need in the community is the kids. There were so many kids running around, playing without a care in the world. And it represented so much to me because it represented like a value system that was so important, and growth and opportunity, you know, and I take that away with me in a very human way. That's what I saw and what it invoked in me as I was doing the tours. But from a policy perspective, and so we take that's the reality, right? That the policy has created and the value system match the policy, which is something we struggle with here because of so many different reasons that we may or may not get into. But the value system match the policy. What I mean by that, I saw 3 prongs. So government was involved in the market, and they were involved in the market because they had units that they owned, right, that were, what we say, 20-some-odd% that impacted the market. And then they had a limited profit model saying that if you take this loan from the government, then we cap your profits. You know, so that it was a 3-pronged approach. Then they had strong tenant protections. And oftentimes when we talk about housing, we talk about it from the development side only. But these are components that made the entire system, I think, work. And it had its flaws, so maybe we'll talk about those too. But overall, that was amazing to me to see. That is what it looks like when values match the policy that they created over 100 years.
Thank you. So we have these index cards. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and Claudia and Gabrielle will bring you the cards. And so please write down your questions for us. And for those joining us online, please use the Q&A function to put in the questions. Supervisor, I'm going to ask you the next question. How can the county leverage its land, resources, and convening power to enable long-term fixed income housing investments? And you had also talked about the city-county joint resolution to build 10,000 units of housing on public land. Could you expand on that, please?
Yeah, so I think that land is such as anything I said, and it's probably the primary asset when we're talking about building and more units into our entire housing system. And so we are having a housing workshop on Wednesday at the county. We're going to be discussing our policies and how one policy matches against the other, and sometimes there's conflict between there's conflict, and so we need to work it all out so that when developers come and want to build, that there is more predictability, it's more of a streamlined process. We certainly need to do a lot more work in that area with regard to the county, but I think one of the biggest things that we can do is, we see that sort of in this resolution that we have with the city of San Diego and the county, where we have a goal of creating 10,000 units by using county-owned land and doing those ground leases with the county-owned land in partnership with our city. So what I have asked is an entire mapping of the parcels that we own across the entire region to see how we can be a better partner with the cities, because a lot of our unincorporated area is tied up basically by environmental protection. But all that being said, I think that that is a really great way that we've shown, sort of, not as a pilot, but we've shown with the city of San Diego that we really can do that fairly well. But we need to do it. One thing about Vienna was everything was at scale, right? It was, so much bigger, right, than what we do at one time here. So just looking more into that and how we can be a partner with the cities that are in the region.
Thank you. Sean, you've talked about innovation both in construction, the way you approach the project, and also innovation in funding. Do you want to talk about some of the more interesting things you've been working on?
Sure, and some of them are actually born by experience in Vienna in terms of our approach with the funds that we receive from the project. But I do want to touch just very quickly on the supervisor's point about the opportunity for the county and other public agencies to be able to use their surplus lands. And there's a state law that encourages that for surplus property that a locality may have to make that available for affordable housing development. We were the great beneficiaries of property in downtown that was put out as an RFP, and because it had an existing restriction on it, its appraisal came out at just under $12,000 for a half an acre downtown. We're able to do 88 units there, 37 of which are for transition age youth, and the rest are also restricted to extremely low income. So there was an article that came out earlier this year that talked about the 6 most expensive projects in San Diego's affordable housing. I was never so happy to not have publicity because our project wasn't on that list. We have completed it. It's come in at $510,000 a door, which may still sound like a lot, but when you're seeing other projects at $900,000 a door, that's a bargain. But even more so than the notion of that, just the land being made available by the city to help that project along. It was also, we only had to go for one source. We worked with the Housing Commission. We were able to get vouchers for all of the residents there, plus a small loan. And then we were off to the races in terms of getting a tax credit allocation with the state, which we won. So that cut down on the length of time, which cuts down the cost, if you know, time is money. So those types of things have a ripple effect at the end of the day. When you just control some of the, what we call it construction $5, which labor and land are amongst the ones that you do. For us, we as a nonprofit have been able to build our Housing Futures Fund. It's an internal fund that we have. We use it for our acquisition, pre-development, financing of our projects. So we are essentially borrowing from ourselves. We're then able to have that fund over time as built up. It's 19 years old as of this date. And it has grown to over $45 million. It's mostly our dollars. 19 million of it is our dollars. The rest of it is leveraged by banks and investors and philanthropy. But we use that as the ability to help keep the cost down on the projects. We charge a very minimal rate against the project. The project pays it when it starts construction. We then revolve that into our next loan. So it's a very similar model to what the housing associations do in Vienna, where they are essentially taking the profit off of their projects, pushing them into their next projects that they do. We think vehicles like that, and certainly hearing that, that there's opportunity here with the Housing Finance Agency for San Diego, those are the types of vehicles that if you use the public resources wisely, you can have that generate additional resources into the project.
Thank you. Elyse, there's a question here from the audience.
Wait, before you do that, I'm sorry. You You only said 2 of the 5 L's.
Oh, it is a
What are
test.
the 5 L's? 'Cause I got the 5 P's.
Okay. So there's labor, there's land, law, lending, and loan.
And lumber, okay, good, I didn't know that, thank you. That's good. Alright, so then the 5 Ps are policies, plans, project, people, and permits.
But we have a different 5B.
I know, I just feel that to try to be cool.
It's promote, produce, preserve, protect, and connect.
Perfect.
We're gonna test it again.
Two versions of the 5Ps. So Elyse, a question from the audience. What are the biggest policy roadblocks of social housing in San Diego?
What is the biggest, getting people to put up 1% of their income to fund the city of San Diego, $500 million a year. 'Cause I did the math once, and that's what I figured it would be, about $500 million a year, and we could really do a lot with that money. So, I don't know that any policymakers would want to lead the charge of standing up and saying, "Hey, voters, come on, you guys good? 1% of your income." We got this, but that's literally what they have, and that's what it might take to create a permanent funding source that is, to get to the scale that what we have seen.
I think just building on that, for some of the ideas that you saw and were inspired by in Vienna, again, one of the challenges of transferring some of those more doable ideas, generally in California and specifically in San Diego. Any of you? All of you?
And there's,
But
Some of it is, I think, though, it's a little bit of a challenge, just because social mindset. There's not an inherent benefit for owning property, as Vino was talking about. So rental plays on the relatively same playing field, and you have the opportunity to be able to provide a affordable home, and people have the opportunity to save money before they're breaking that intergenerational cycle. So that's not gonna happen anytime soon, free healthcare, things like that. Things that people think about as needing their home to be able to cushion against life's challenges. Those things may have a much bigger safety net, so it's a little bit more challenging to try and implement some of those things. There are things like SLA is great in terms of clearing permits, the city's cooperation around complete communities, things like that, go a long way towards getting projects.
thank you. Greg, do you want to add something? You've been a huge proponent of housing for all with a keen focus on people-centered planning. And one of the things that you said at the beginning was that you bring a different perspective and you're a different messenger to the set of messages we're talking about. And so how might we change the framing here and the narrative in California and in the US to talk about housing as a human right?
So we take that back to our role as community colleges in the education ecosystem and how that aligns with values that, as I think about us being involved in housing. Community colleges are a fairly unique American invention, and they are a counterpoint to the history of the way that higher education has operated, which has been entirely about its exclusion, celebrated for its exclusion. To this day, universities love to tell you how many people they don't accept. And then we all go, wow, you must be really incredible if you told that many people no. It's a horrible history to it, because who they accept did not have nearly as much to do with the capability of the individual as it did with race, ethnicity, gender, wealth, family status, the history of that is really bad. And community colleges were created in part to offer a pathway that was not going to be made available. And even within California's educational master plan, I forget the exact percentages, but it's written in there, something like the top 13% of people in the state will get to go to a UC. The top 25% will get to go to a CSU, and then everybody else will go to community college. And so we exist in this structure where we are both perceived as lesser than, but we are the place that social and economic transformation can happen. And I say that knowing it firsthand, because when I was graduating high school, I had academic performance good enough to be accepted by UCLA or UC Berkeley. I had the finances to be able to afford a community college. My parents had to say, we can't help you with anything, but there's a community college on the street. And so I know what it is to need that pathway. When I think about our mission as a community college, I do not think about the number of students we enroll, the number of students that persist from the fall to the spring, the number of students that graduate. Not even really the number of students that go on to get a living wage job necessarily. It's what's happening to the percentage of households in San Diego that are earning a living wage. What's happening in our poverty rate, our crime rates, the percentage of people that are experiencing chronic health disease, because we know that education is strongly correlated, if not causally connected, to all of those indicators of how well we're thriving. And we know the history of who got to participate in what. I think probably to touch a bit on what Supervisor Montgomery Steppe was saying, we may or may not talk about some of these things. But the history of who gets to be in housing and where that housing is and the quality of it and the relative safety of it, there's some really, really, really negative things that we have to confront. So going to Vienna and seeing a model of everybody deserves to have safe housing, and we will collectively invest in that. I very quickly did the math when they showed that 0.5% paid by the employee, 0.5% by the employer. California could be generating $13 billion a year if people were just willing to pay $500 on every $100,000 they earn. Like, I'm a bit of a naive optimist. I think we probably could sell that message at some point. Like, there's a transformational opportunity, but I think it has to start with, what are you going to do with it? Because as I've been in the city and going to different spaces, and one person in particular I remember very prominently on an economic development forum stage saying, how many billions have we invested in this, and where's the housing? Right? People don't necessarily see what we're doing. And so that idea of that large-scale community, 5,000 units, it would be impossible to not see. It would bring all of the benefits I mentioned earlier. And then who do we put as kind of the face of that? When I walk around my neighborhood, and I've lived in the same neighborhood now for 5 years, and I've seen junior high graduation signs, high school graduation signs, college graduation signs, and I ask my neighbor, especially the college graduation ones, so where are your kids settling? What are they going to be working in? The answer has never been, oh, they're working here in San Diego and they're starting here. They aren't coming back home because of cost of living. How are you going to take an entry-level job, even if you're in an occupation track, an industry or career track, that may have very lucrative outcomes at the other end? You can't start here and raise a family here. And you're better doing that somewhere else and then coming here much later in life. And as a result, San Diego Unified's enrollment's gone from over 120,000 about 12 years ago to just over 95,000 this year. So it's mission aligned for us to be in this work of helping to create those pathways from free transitional housing to be part of the city and the county's support services, to very low AMI housing so that people have that first step as they are working in poverty wage jobs and getting out of that into middle income housing, into market rate housing. We have the chance to build something like that that's aligned with our mission, that people think about, yes, we need a way for essential workers in our community to have affordable housing, to be able to raise young families, and it's not all the negative stereotypes that might go with, oh, you're building affordable housing to serve who, and I don't want that in my neighborhood kind of thinking. So we can bring a values first, human first approach to it that's connected to a lot of other things that we have built to try to respond to some of the very negative history that we've created.
Thank you. Let's stay on messaging and narrative. We have 3 questions from the audience that I'm going to try and put together and open it up to the entire panel. How do different sectors help shape public narratives about housing, and how do we create alignment, especially given San Diego's history where we've spent more than 100 years preserving segregation? What is it going to take from our leaders across sectors to shift our housing values through action, and how can we make this change happen despite the overwhelming pushback from NIMBYs fighting to keep the segregation in place? Vino, do you want to start?
Sure. I started with as a start from the pulpit. Our churches have not only be a place of just go there for sacraments and listening to the word of God, but has to be like, who's your neighbor kind of a question has to be asked. If you just change it to Supervisor Montgomery, Steppe and Elyse in the city and say it's your job. No, the job starts in our neighborhoods, in our churches, to ask the question is, who's my neighbor sitting next to me? Is that neighbor just on the brink of being unhoused, homeless? Is that person living a quality of life that all of us need to share? I'm not talking about communism and socialism right now, don't get me wrong. But we have to start thinking in that way that policy doesn't just happen in DC or in Sacramento or in city halls or in county offices. It starts in our neighborhood, and the narrative has to start happening in our own backyard. To start like what Greg said, can my 16-year-old son and 14-year-old daughter start imagining and dreaming about living in San Diego with an entry-level job? Are they going to look at going somewhere else to start a life and hoping they'll come back to the beautiful San Diego?
Supervisor?
So many thoughts. Like, I'm thinking of the book, The Sum of Us, and how so many people in our country, I'll just speak because segregation was brought up, are willing to kind of hurt themselves in order to hold fast to these ideals and principles that they have, that actually everyone may not deserve housing, right? And so that is the challenge that we have I think we should pour into our young people, but we are facing, it's hard to create a narrative when you're fighting against that true value, that everyone doesn't hold the same value. You know, every person doesn't deserve housing. And so that's, I'm not a narrative person. I try to be, my staff tries to get me to be, but it is so hard. I think that there's such a yearning for authenticity that we have to speak to people one by one, conversation by conversation, because there are so many layers to and bias in how we, any of us in this room, right, can approach certain situations because the conditioning and the things that we've been taught in our educational system in this country. And so to go to sort of a narrative, people are not, people are very smart. And we have to really believe what we're saying, and we have to be able to have those hard conversations about what we're saying. And when I talk about segregation with some of us, I'm thinking of a story where when integration was finally allowed in the pools, some of the neighbors in a particular community would rather see that pool closed than to open it to Black people, right? And so that's what we're still dealing with that, or else we wouldn't have the president. Okay. Would not be in the situation that we're in, where our most vulnerable community members are facing even more hurt and pain, right? And so we have to attack that. We have to dig into that. Because housing is fundamental to our health as a society and individually. And so it's more of a, yes, we need to have a narrative, but that narrative needs to be supplemental to the education and the conversations with folks, because we do have to shift our thought process, and that just is not going to happen overnight. And so I think it's just important to like level set that. Because we are in for a fight right now. We know we can't grow as a city, as a county, as a region without our young people being able to stay here and afford to be here. But we also face a lot of folks that really, no building at all. Other quick thing, and I'm done. There's still, even in the way that we build, even in our zoning laws now, even in our community plans, we still promote segregation in our communities. Absolutely. We still do not build as much low-income housing. Some of this is pricing, but we still do not build as much lower-income housing in our high resource areas. So right now we can say build, but what and where are we building and how are we building it? And are we actually building communities? And oftentimes the answer is no.
All right. So Vino, you've been championing, and as you've talked so eloquently about the use of faith-based land stewardship, and using that land for housing, affordable housing, middle-income housing. So as you talked about what you have plans for from Catholic Charities, there's also a question about small churches that have parking lots that might want to build housing. And what is the first thing that they have to do, and is that even a scalable proposition?
Sure, that's a great question. I don't know how many of you go to church, but if you go to church, you'll see that sometimes, including my mom, she sits in the same place every time. It's the same thing with parking lots. They park there. It's almost like a designated reserve for my mom's name, right? So, in a small parking lot in a church, Catholic Church is a piece of the puzzle. It's not the entire puzzle. There are other churches like Episcopal and United Methodist and other AME and other churches out there that we all have to come together with the Turner Institute, and then UCSD has done another research. Out of the 4,000 plus acres in San Diego that faith-based entities own, about 3,400 plus acres are buildable that owned by faith-based entities. We need to come together because the parking is needed. Because in San Diego there are about 96 parishes in Catholic churches and 13 missions. Those are total about 109 locations in San Diego County. And in that, there is a lot of parking lots, but there are big and small. So we need to figure out, okay, church is active, you got the Saturday Mass and the Sunday Mass, people will be going there. How do you ensure that there is parking? So we have to think outside the box over here. We have to maybe go look at how parking is done in maybe in other places, like in Vienna. And say maybe there are areas of which that the parking is there, and you put still, then you build in second and third and go up. And look at ways that we can do it. And also, once we do this, you can't just build housing. So we have to build like, okay, because the church has in those, there are schools next to churches. Many of the Catholic schools are built next to churches. So how do you look at it and say they are actively using it for the religious purposes? So we have to look at our own housing policy and laws and say that if we have to leverage public funding or even other joint funding that might come together, that how can you ensure that that church is not losing it? Because that's when NIMBYism comes in. When we say like we're going to build in this small parking lot or a large parking lot or this former school or existing areas that may be next to a church, that how can you ensure that those individuals who are going to church are not going to lose their religious education that they've had in that school area or the community center or whatever it might be. So that's where we have to start looking at also developing land on church means that we have to look outside the box of how we facilitate that for the faith-based entities, but also the small parking lots, how faith-based entities can come together and collaborate, that we are not in our own silos, that we are only thinking about our own churches, but working across the various denominations to say, you're big, we are small, all of us together, we have to create a solution.
Thank you. Greg, I'm going to have you talk a little bit about the Regional Housing Finance Authority and the plans that you have for San Diego.
Yeah, so we are in the process of coalescing around what will be the primary vision of the Housing Finance Authority. Is it renter protections and keeping people in their current housing? Is it constructing new housing and adding to the supply? How does it connect to private ownership and a values conversation of do we want to continue to push for a model that gets people into being able to buy market rate housing and kind of stay connected to that vision? Or is it evolving ourselves away from that as being the primary way to generate and then transfer wealth and come up with some other models? So as we define that, I think where we're headed towards is that our primary purpose is going to be to construct as much housing as possible. with a focus on density as closely connected to major employment centers and transit as possible, to be able to decrease the reliance on the car, to be able to tell somebody, you can live here, you have all the amenities that you need daily within your community. So again, going back to that, community is such a scale that it invites all of the investments from different types of retail and commercial enterprises, that you can get to work, that you can have a quality of life within a integrated economic model. People, as they bragged in Vienna so much, knowing what we would say your zip code does not really tell me much about where you work, how much money you make, what social status you're at, because it's so heavily integrated. And what a beautiful thing it was to create that. And so we'll also have to look at what are the available taxing authorities, because the power of the finance authority is that it can independently take a measure to the voters. And if it's a citizen's initiative, only have a 50% plus one voting threshold to impose a variety of different types of tax measures, parcel taxes, a general obligation bond, etc. So figuring out what the right model is, how much revenue it can generate, and then what can we do with what kind of scale. And so we're working on mission, vision, value statements, and just thinking about ultimately what are we going to create in a housing plan to be able to go to voters, and learning from the city and some other measures recently that weren't successful. How do we tell people precisely what it is that we propose to do and how it will benefit them? Going back to what the supervisor was saying, we need to be able to articulate that message, because politics ultimately becomes the art of the possible. And if we can't show people why this would benefit them directly, then we probably won't succeed in that. So that's kind of where we are in our evolution. We look for a lot more publicity around this as we get into the new calendar year and we start to have something to articulate.
Thank you. Sean, this is a question for you. Why can't we simply mandate the developers to create more deed restricted units in existing market rate developments?
Well, there are inclusionary housing requirements. There is a recent change that did allow for, in some cases, to have those units transferred to an affordable community, have essentially have that market rate developer pay for those affordable units. We have a project off of a university in which we're taking some of the transfer of that authority over, and that's an additional subsidy that's coming to the creation of affordable housing. Other times, though, the city of San Diego has a requirement for market rate developers to do affordable component.
And one of the things that we've been doing is to provide an overview of pro forma and how you read them, because in our efforts to provide for more affordable housing on the backs of market rate developers, sometimes the projects don't pencil. And so you get to a point where you don't have any projects at all. And so I think it's important for us to take a look at what point does the project not be feasible. And to push for as much affordable is great, and it's a great policy, but the more we build the Christmas tree, at some point the project just isn't feasible. So we need to look at that from that perspective as well. And here's a question for the supervisor and Elyse. Can you mention some examples of how the Viennese regulatory structure is different from ours in terms of zoning and permitting processes? Elyse?
I am trying to think about, they still have similarities, they still have environmental regulations, they're very strict actually on that, so that's a piece of the puzzle. They still have lobbyists representing different industry groups that help influence regulation. They have building regulations that are similar to our building codes, and so they still have a complex permitting process, but with the use of the master plans, I think that there's a lot less sort of land development review upon permitting, because they know what is going forth there. So I can't remember if the question was similarities or differences, but I don't have I don't have more of an answer than that, actually. There was actually a lot more similarities than I thought there was going to be.
I think from the county perspective, we probably takes a longer time to get projects through our system. Right? So what I remember, one of the folks that came to talk to us from the city, okay, we're switching. All right. What I remember in one of our seminars was that one, the land banking is robust there. Buying it, banking land for future projects, master plan communities, they were very strategic about all of those different steps. But also once a project got ready to submit or whatever their process was, it was a much less amount of time that ours take, right? So that was I think for me, a big difference, because part of our issues come from the time that we spend. We are developing out MTS property, but we have some projects that we've been talking about for like 5 years, and laws have changed since then that would allow more density, and we're still looking at 6 stories when there's a possibility we could build 20, right? And so you're in this situation where you've been working on something for 5 years, don't necessarily want to change it, but there's such a need and possibility. So anyway, it just doesn't take as long to get through their processes from what I recall.
And keep in mind that, the master planning that they are doing, it's so that government entities can also go build housing too. And so, that actually created a little bit more synergy. And I wanted to be able to learn more about their transit planning, with how they build the housing, but pretty much they plan to build the transit and then the housing around it. And so, we built transit here where it was cheap, easy, and almost free to do it without really thinking about where the housing was going to go. And so now we're trying to retroactively apply housing to an existing, heavy rail system versus they're like, this is where it's going. We're going to make sure people can get to their job within 20 minutes if they have to hop on, the heavy or light rail. And so it's a lot less time spent on the GHG emission calcs and different VMT, things like that, because they already really have a lot of the master planning planned out. And then obviously a lot less time developing new freeway interchanges.
One of the things I noticed, thank you, the supervisor, and we for this. Well, if a developer is interested there, they have a single point of contact to go through the whole system. Instead of running from one pole to another, that they have a single point, and there's somebody to hold your hand as a developer and guide you through. And if you're going out of the guardrails, they bring you back in. So I think that's where one of the main differences I would see here is we are not jumping from one department to another within the same city or within the county and the city or within the state and the local region. So that's where I saw also there's a kind of a single point of entry and somebody's there guiding those folks in there.
I would add to that, it's a single point of entry for the person as well. That you think about how difficult it is. We have entire organizations devoted just to helping people figure out where affordable housing is and try to get into it. They've been able to centralize that. So you go to an agency of the city who has all of the inventory available across the entire city at a single point of entry. So they really streamline the process, where the way that we tax people with time going to 17 different offices and filling out 38 different forms to be able to get into supportive programs, they really made that as easy as possible, it seems, at least from the way they presented it.
Another takeaway that I had when I started trying to figure out how many people work for the city of Vienna, when you add in the people that work in the housing agencies and then the transit agencies, anyone want to guess how many people work for the city of Vienna and those agencies collectively? 100,000 people. 100,000 people are employed in a city of 2 million people. Yeah. So for perspective, the city of San Diego employs 13,000 people. So they have a lot of bureaucracy, but they're also, so integrated that they work really well together. They have a lot of people working on the issues.
And I would add that creates a much easier playing field for assembling the land and cleaning it. They are providing the transit access. They are eliminating things that some would argue are unnecessary here. For instance, annual recertifications of everybody in affordable housing every year. Things like that ultimately are making it easier just to execute it and operate it and at a much lower cost at the end.
So, and in a housing crisis as we're in, it's hard to look at the big picture and the bold ideas that we can make happen, or the systems change that needs to happen. I mean, we are so intent on putting out the fires, it's hard to be thinking about that. So I'm gonna ask each of you what we need, who the partners are that need to be part of this process, how the several community planning groups that are involved but somewhat siloed be brought into the process, and just like think of the big picture ideas and the changes that you think are feasible or what we should be working on. Vino?
The way that I got involved with Vienna study was through a table that I think Greg and a few of us have been, this was planned to house San Diego. That's been going on for about, I think, 2 years now. And it's just not, policy folks, but folks who have land like church and school districts. And that's how we all came together with this Unified School District and UCSD and SDSU and others to come together and say, okay, what can we really do to come and have a conversation with each other? Because when you start sitting at the table, first and foremost, getting to know, building that trust, and through that trust, look at, okay, what are you doing? Maybe you are, the Regional Finance Housing Authority, Finance Housing Authority is there, but what can we do in something similar for faith-based entities? We can't tap into the public dollars because state and religion, there's a separation there. So what can we look to create new funding models that we all are coming together instead of us working in silos? And that's happening right now with all the crises and all the darkness that is surrounding us. There's something happening here in San Diego, and hopefully through this collaborative environment, going through like these environments to go study, like Vienna or other places, that we start thinking about there's more commonalities between us than more differences.
I think for me, it's being able to articulate what the vision we're trying to create is, so that we can, to the supervisor's point, align the values to the policy. But until I think we've clearly told people this is what it would look like to have an affordable real estate ecosystem for San Diego in a way that they can see it and how they would benefit, it's going to be difficult to get the policy to be able to align because there won't be the political will behind the policy.
So I think that I'm a bit of a nerd in that I really want there to be data informing the policies, but then I want that to be transformed into visuals. So kind of pushing on what you're saying, you want people to be able to see it. And I think that how Vienna has the competitions for their developers is actually a really cool thing to do. I mean, we can't be afraid to talk about things that are outside of the box. I did make mention, and it got put in an article in the Atlantic, and I was spoken to about it because I said, well, maybe we just use the airport in the middle of San Diego, the Montgomery Gibbs. And I was reminded that that is an economic generator. It is the most busy small airport in the entire nation, and so get your hands off of it at least. But the point being, I mean, at some point, we might need to do the math. We might need to look and see what makes the most sense there and be able to tell the story and use all of the partners at the table. Right now we have data so readily available that we didn't have before. We have GIS map layers. We have people who just, sit around their house and nerd out on these things. And we really need to be able to bring those things out and talk about what could happen in our city. God bless the community planning group members, but not everybody there has the expertise to do long-term community visioning, which is really what we have tasked them to do. The community planning groups, their job is to say, hey, help us talk about what your community's vision is, and so we can put it in this land use document that's good for every 20 to 25 years. In Vienna, they're updating their strategic growth plans every 10 years for the whole city. don't have the capacity to do that. We update our general plan like every 30 years, so I think that there's a role for data and visuals to tie back into that narrative that we have to tell, and I think that it's gonna continue to be driven by the schools. I heard UCSD, Bill Fulton said he's gonna start like a city lab there to talk about housing. I think that's fantastic, and so I think getting our groups together to tell those stories is really what it's gonna take.
Yeah, I would maybe piggyback off your ideas, but it's also to talk about, in addition to data, it's also even just accounting for the resources that we actually already do have, and being able to map those in a way that reflects the policy that we develop and have it inform the policy as well. I think about the measures that the state has suddenly done over the last several years to encourage affordable housing. Not only just beyond thinking about financing, but what are the levers that contribute to delays, what are the levers that contribute to cost that they can affect. So things like as before, as an example, when getting the community college districts along with churches involved in using their resources for affordable housing. Recently, they just created AB 130, which is kind of an omnibus of things, but tucked in there is an exemption from CEQA for infill.
And we haven't even started talking about SB 79.
So the opportunities that are with these pieces. So it's even just starting on that, being able to say, okay, what are the tools that we actually do have that can be that goal that we have in the policy? Just being able to figure out what we adjust in order to make it work.
I think the beauty about this panel and about the trips in general are the fact that there are many people, different people from different sectors working together and really, it sounds cliche now, but it is really going to take that type of effort. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to participate this evening, because I didn't want to go and just say, this is so cool, at Vienna, and not be able to come back and discuss it and dig deeper and do all the things that I think we need to do together. I think so much of this is going to be once things are mapped out and we have very real plans, that political will is just such a big part of this, because it is just not going to be acceptable until people see it. And we talked about being skeptics, right? I know I was until I saw, at least even just one development, right? And so I just think that it's going to take folks and leaders that are willing to risk status and willing to risk political credibility and those things to push some of these ideas forward and take a risk on the fact that they may or may not work. And that's really the hardest thing to do, but that is a requirement. For anybody that has not seen Show Me a Hero, please watch it. HBO Max. It's about City of Yonkers and how housing policy can really drive elected officials out of. It's a very sad story. But the point is, we need political will.
There's still a lot more questions, but we're coming towards the end of our time here, so I'm going to wrap up with a question to each one of you, and Supervisor, we'll start with you. What is the one thing that you need from us to be successful in trying to make the changes that you want?
I envision like a huge power mapping and geographical mapping, we're all in the room, just figuring things out together on a regular basis, like regular convenings. I know that's a whole lot that I just said right now, but I really feel like that is, part of the master planning processes that we heard about. Is some type of organization around that, getting to the nitty gritty. Because I love seeing every one of your faces, but we gotta get to the meat of this stuff, right? And so I'm really wanting to do that. One thing that I wanted to mention about Vienna and their budget, because I asked a question about law enforcement, I just thought this was interesting, so I'll tag this on. their federal government actually pays for all of their law enforcement. So their budget goes primarily to housing, education, and healthcare. And so, not that we want this federal government to pay for law enforcement, but it was just something that, it was so interesting to see that different dynamic of the, you know, how much more kind of freedom they have. They didn't really have to worry about law enforcement. And most of the people, it was very monolithic, right? Most of the people we talked to look similar, all right? So that's a challenge that we have here, but I still believe that we can do it.
You know, my mentor when I was really young told me never to speak after an elected official. That's the best thing. The only thing I would maybe add is, I often say this to colleagues in the housing industry, we do not do a good job of telling our story. And oftentimes we need to have others that are equally trying to serve the same people be part of that discussion, or at least be part of the chorus. You know? So I would say maybe if going forward, if to kind of be part of the convenings is maybe bringing folks like in the education, like in the ecumenical groups, like in health. We did a project down in National City in cooperation with Cathedral Health. You know, those are folks that understand and get it as well. And if we can invite them and potentially whatever great ideas or resources they can bring to the table as well, that's going to be all the better.
Thank you. I think that to piggyback on that, having the sort of written materials that come out of lessons learned that we can keep applying and keep sharing that, so that not everybody's going to be able to go to Vienna, right? So this forum is super helpful. The document that you put together with your 5 Ps, I've seen it. It is really fantastic, and I think that just, you know, all of us really writing and sharing about what it is we know, what we're looking forward to, and what we want is really important and critical to continue the movement.
Pick up on something Sean said there about humanizing the stories that come with policy and work in housing. And very quickly, some years ago, I helped a nonprofit up in the Seattle area with some strategic planning, and they were doing green chemistry. And as I was talking to people, when you said green chemistry, there was this immediate negative backlash. When we talked about the polluted river in their backyard, very interested in green chemistry. They just didn't know they were talking about green chemistry. And that's the power of those stories. When we talk about, like when I talk to people about the fact that their grandkids live in Texas and they only get to see them twice a year, they care deeply about housing affordability. When you talk about it in other ways, they tune you out, I'm not interested, not in my backyard and all that. So humanizing the story, I think, is critical.
Amen to that. Humanizing it. So in my parish, in my church, I had a conversation recently with one of my fellow member of the church asking why they couldn't bring their kid over for catechism class. And they said, I have a long drive, I cannot come. And so I asked, is it something recent? No, I've been doing this for about 10 years. That's been my life, so I cannot bring my child to catechism class. So going back to the humanizing factor of it, ask the question, we should as a society, in our churches, in our communities, everywhere else, who's my neighbor? And what is happening to this neighbor in their life? We sit in the pews, we just go there, I stick my tongue out, I receive my Eucharist or communion and go back, but I really do not know my neighbor. So before it gets to policy and others, we in our communities have to have honest conversations in our churches, in our pews. Who's my neighbor? Do I really care about them? And from that, we might be better off than Vienna many times over.
Thank you. I just want to wrap up. You see that question on the screen, how will we live tomorrow? This is Vienna doing a 7-year study on connecting with all of their communities and neighborhoods to take a look at what's going well. I mean, we keep reviewing and looking at their social housing model and talking about how wonderful it is, but they take the time, and this was a 7-year study to look at what's worked, what hasn't worked, and how they need to pivot to take care of the future. So that's their fundamental question, is how will we live tomorrow? So just wanted to wrap up with that for us. And then one last reminder, we do have, so we've taken 7 delegations to Vienna. We have the next one coming up in April. April 19th to the 25th. So if anyone here is interested in finding out more, talk to one of us from the GPLA team, and we're happy to provide you with more information. And finally, I just want to wrap up with, this is not a one and done, and we don't go to Vienna and come back and say that's it. So we have a community of practice where we bring all the 280 plus delegates together and have these conversations and have these convenings statewide to see what we can do for collective impact in terms of policy, in terms of narrative, the financing. And so we will convene working groups to continue to work on those. We have a San Diego specific community of practice with a lot of programming there too. And we're hoping to launch one in Los Angeles and Bay Area. So just wanted to give you a sense of the continued conversations post Vienna. And with that, please join me in thanking our panel today. To provide a small token of our gratitude for each of the panelists. And thank you all to the audience members who joined us today. Stay back, we do have a networking reception. And for those of you that joined us online, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll keep you posted on upcoming programming.
I just want to say thanks again to our sponsors, Alliance Healthcare Foundation, Funders Together to End Homelessness, Previs Foundation, and the Chancellor Initiative. And thank you to our panelists who have been great partners. Without our sponsors and our partners who continue to have this conversation, we wouldn't be able to be here with you today, and we continue to share the information where we can all work together and create change. So thank you.